Hello, Total War fans! Welcome to the first episode of Total War Unit Breakdown, a new series here in Total War TV. This new series will present a closer look at the factions featured in the Total War series, as well as strategic and tactical advice on ways that the faction units can be useful to you as a player. Now, in my own experience commentating and hosting game lobbies, there are always new players who step into the world of Total War. And because Total War is such a different kind of tactical game compared to more mainstream titles like, say, StarCraft and Age of Empires, the learning curve can be pretty steep for newcomers. Therefore, I have structured this faction unit analysis series to be very friendly to newcomers to the game and may not necessarily be useful or helpful to more experienced players who already play well and have mastered their own playstyle, that at least they probably should have by now. This series is to give newcomers a foundation in order to have a stronger gameplay in the future. Maybe this might even, lessen the number of hill campers, corner campers, hackers, noob boxers, whatever you want to call them, and self-proclaimed pro players. And, yeah, but maybe, that's being too positive. Anyway, keep in mind that most of the things I'm going to be talking about are for multiplayer use and probably relevant only to multiplayer. I'll tell you if what I'm saying is also relevant to campaign, but most of the time you can transfer what you know in multiplayer to campaign to better your gameplay there. Anyway, with that said, let's begin with everyone's favorite Total War, Rome. What better way to start Rome Total War than to look at its front cover faction? Presenting the very noob-friendly and overpowered to a fault, the Romans. Now, the Roman faction in this game are divided up into 4 different Roman families. Although really, only 3 of them are technically families. The other one is like the government army. Anyway, these 4 Roman factions are the Julii, the Scipii, and the Brutii, and the SPQR. Now, all 4 Roman factions have the exact same unit composition, with the exception of the type of gladiators each faction use. Therefore, when I talk about Roman units, assume that they're consistent for all 4 factions. Now, let's get started. First up is the peasant unit. The peasants have 1 attack point and 1 defense point. They cost 100 denarii to use and cheapest unit for purchase in every faction. That being said, they are your throwaway units. Fairly useless in multiplayer, but fairly handy in single campaign. Many players use peasants to absorb missiles from an oncoming army. However, due to their extremely, and I heavily emphasize extreme, low morale, they would most likely rout before they can absorb anything substantial. A feature of the peasant unit that makes them seem like good fodder units is that each person inside the unit is spread out quite wide as a default. This is actually very bad as they are in perpetual loose formation and greatly diminishes the already low morale even further. The only place they really shine is in single-player campaign, where they can be used to give any city some extra population, which is useful when upgrading. Also useful to use peasants are on enemy territory and disband them while inside enemy-controlled space. What this will do, or might do, is that it would cause the enemy city to go on a riot due to overpopulation and the standing army to take damage every turn, and would be easy pickings for your army, or for your own army. However, within the realm of multiplayer, there's just no place for the peasant unit. My suggestion is to not include the peasants in your army when there are much better ones out there, as you will see right now. The next unit today is the Town Watch. It has 3 attack points, 7 defense points, and horrible morale. Disregarding morale for a minute, what these numbers will mean to you is that these units will last much longer than the peasant. The Town Watch is by no means your ace in the hole, but they are extremely useful fodder units, should you choose to have any. For one thing, the 7 defense will allow them to withstand enemy charges at a greater rate than peasants, and with fewer losses, it would mean that they are less likely to rout almost immediately. Now, don't get me wrong, they still suck ass, but they would actually be able to withstand a volley of missiles with a fair expectation that they will hold long enough to keep the rest of your army safe. And at a cost of 150 denarii, a mere 50 denarii more than the peasant, it can be a very cost-effective unit if handled correctly. Now let's go back to morale. The morale of the Town Watch is really no better than the peasant. However, what sets them apart is the extra defense, meaning less casualties equals less likely to rout from volleys, and the fact that they can bolster their own morale just by being close to the main body of your army, thus extending their lifespan as fodder, something that the peasants do not benefit from. So, in a tactical perspective, never advance your town watch too far from your main army, or they will rout immediately like peasants due to the mechanics of the game works. Or how the mechanics of the game works. Wow. Anyway, so how should you use how should you use the town watch? Man, I'm losing it today. I still say to steer clear from the town watch unless you know what you're doing. A common strategy is using the town watch as a vanguard to absorb and waste enemy missiles on. Another way is when fighting a Roman faction, town watches make a very good Pila absorbers. Let them advance ahead of your army to absorb or prevent Pila being thrown. A not so common strategy is using the town watch as part of an outflanking element to go attack any enemy archers or artillery at the back lines. The key element here is to include them within an outflanking force and not to send them alone. This is because of what I said earlier about them boosting their own morale from the presence and their proximity from other friendly units. Since we're on the subject of shitty units anyway, let's keep going. Next up is the Velites. It has 5 attack points, 7 defense points, and costs 270 denarii to field. Since this unit is technically classified as a missile unit, it has a separate 7 points of attack from the javelins they carry. The average throwing range of adult javelin athletes today is around 73 meters. However, since this is the ancient times, and most likely the age range of Velites will be from around 15 to 18, the range becomes around 63 to 73 meters. However, we're talking about average citizens here. The Velites are the poor, so they probably aren't eating right, and physically less superior to modern day athletes. So we're going to say that the average Velite will probably throw around 50 to 60 meters on a good day, probably even less for the most decrepit. They bear similarities to the peltasts found in other factions, except for one thing: bearskins. And really, that's about it. The bearskin is supposed to be used to identify themselves in battle and a symbol of their place in social hierarchy, or lack thereof. If they act like good little decoys, assuming they survive, they get promoted. But other than that, their purpose was scouting and first to die on the front lines. Not much else to say about the Velites, except they're just about the crappiest range units you can have as Rome. Field them only if you're using a Primarian army build, and even then, once they use up their supply of javelins, they quickly become rather pointless. Have one of two of them if you really want to, but honestly, just save your unit slot for something else. Speaking of Velites, they have an upgraded version, the Light Auxilia. It has 5 attack points, 7 defense points, 7 missile attack points, and costs 290 denarii to field. Notice that they have the exact same stats as the Velites, except that the Light Auxilia have better stamina, which means they won't get tired easily. Good for an outflanking maneuver, I suppose, but the only real purpose of the Light Auxilia is to show the transition in the military history of Rome from having conscripts to a professional army. I will make the same recommendation here as I did with the Velites. Have one or two if you absolutely just have to have your javelin throwers, like they're your butter to your bread. Moving right along down the line of range units, we move on to the next one, the Roman archers. The Roman archers have 3 attack points, 2 defense points, and 7 missile attack points. They cost 190 denarii to field, and probably the most cost-effective archer unit for Rome. Notice that they have lower attack and defense compared to the Velites and Light Auxilia, but those numbers refer to how they do when they get into close combat. The number you want to concern yourself with is the missile damage. They do the average 7 points of damage, and they cost significantly less than the Velites and Light Auxilia. In addition, they have about 3 times longer range than your average javelin thrower, and have a much higher supply of arrows. What this means is that at the same damage that the javelin units do, you get better range and supply, thus extending the unit's usefulness to a large amount, compared to if you're using Velites or Light Auxilia. Their weaker close combat stats will mean that should they end up in hand-to-hand combat, they will rout much faster. However, by general rule of thumb, all foot range units will generally have a shorter lifespan in hand-to-hand combat anyway, Especially since the morale veltes and auxilia are fairly low to begin with anyway, the benefits of the Roman archers definitely outweigh the negative and at a lower cost. So how should you use the Roman archers? Use the Roman archers in any way you want archers to support you. You can put them ahead of your army to pepper the enemy as they come, use them to screen your main army, you can use them at the back for support, or perhaps to either wings or both of your army to hit the enemy at the flank. Keep in mind, especially for the new players out there, that range units are horrible at close combat. So, make sure they are protected. A strategy I like to use, and you can see this in some of my videos that I posted, is to use the archers to lure out cavalry while my own cavalry hunt down whatever's left in the enemy rear lines. Now, a feature of the Roman archers that you can find in all other archer units in the other factions is the fire arrow mode. Here, the archers gain an extra attack bonus due to the fire. The fire is not designed to kill enemies, but rather to hurt the morale. Keep in mind that the fire arrows increases scatter compared to the normal arrows. The game works like this for the archers. As the archers get further from their target and closer to their maximum range, the scatter gets bigger and the arrows are less likely to hit any single person within a unit. So, if you put this in a typical graph, the x-axis is the distance and the y-axis is the amount of scatter. A normal arrow would have a gradual descent as the distance increases to the right of the axis. However, what a fire arrow does is make the graph steeper, therefore the scatter distance becomes shorter. In other words, the fire arrow causes the archers to reach maximum scatter in shorter distances. You can also look at it as lower accuracy at shorter distance compared to normal arrows. There's definitely a big trade-off there. A unique feature of the Roman archer is that it has a natural loose formation as a default. The less compact formation means that they offset enemy archer accuracy by being a little bit more spread out. However, when skirmishing, it is still advisable to use loose formation as it gives the Roman archers better unit spread. The last unit for today is the Archer Auxilia. Boasting 4 attack points, 7 defense points, and 9 missile attack points, it is the big brother of the Roman archer. However, at the cost of 490 denarii, I still recommend the use of the Roman archers over Archer Auxilia, at least on low money battles, unless you want absolute archer superiority. In medium to high money battles, the Archer Auxilia can be extremely dangerous. The difference between the Auxilia and its Roman counterpart is the extreme range. They have about 50% longer range than the Roman archers, and can definitely outshoot any lesser archers of other factions. Notice also that the Archer Auxilia are dressed in chainmail. This is not for show, as this armor allows the Archer Auxilia to withstand hails of arrow fire, more resistant to fire arrows, and increase the lifespan when charged. In fact, I once used an Archer Auxilia to outflank and actually managed to make the enemy rout. Also, any depleted units that charge a healthy Archer Auxilia will most likely rout. Well, I've said a lot of things. By the way, the inspiration for this unit review is Drifter, and that's an O with a 0 instead of an actual letter O. And he does Call of Duty and Battlefield Weapons review, and I just want to give a shout out to him. If you're into Call of Duty, you can find the link to his channel right there on the screen. So, I hope this unit review proves useful to you, and in the next episode we will continue with Rome and finally get into the heavier elements of the faction. See y'all next time.